Miami greeted me that morning with a sun so bright it felt almost aggressive. At 70 years old, after 40 years spent in the thick of the IRS and as a senior special agent for the FBI, I should have been enjoying the peace. My dream was supposed to be a glass of aged bourbon and a baseball game on a big screen in the living room. But no. That same intuition, the thing that kept me from taking a bullet to the head for decades, was screaming. It was twisting my gut harder than cheap, bootleg tequila. It all started with an 11-hour flight from Madrid to Houston. My name is Roger Vega. People who knew me in the field still call me Commander. I'm the kind of man who can look at a single digit in a ledger and know the books are cooked, and I know exactly when my daughter is in trouble. I didn't warn anyone about my arrival. No message, no call. Surprise is the ultimate weapon of a predator, just as I always taught the rookies at Quantico. My daughter, Sophia, hadn't called me in 3 months. 3 whole months. For a girl who used to call her father for any reason, even just to ask which spices to add to a brisket so it would taste like childhood, this silence was more terrifying than a declaration of war. The last voice message she sent a week ago sounded like the rasp of a bird being strangled. Dad, I'm fine, don't worry. Robert and I are very busy with a new project. Love you. There were cracks in that voice. The kind of tells that give away a bluffing poker player. Someone was standing next to her. Someone was controlling her every breath. On the plane, I ordered a double whiskey, neat. I stared out the window at the deep blue of the Atlantic separating me from my only daughter. I had left her in Texas, in that luxurious mansion in River Oaks, a Houston suburb, believing she would be happy with Robert. I never liked that spoiled brat. Robert Sullivan was the quintessential trust fund kid. Perfectly gelled hair, a bleached smile, and a way of dropping financial terms as if he moved billions, when in reality he was just burning through life. The type who prefers to brag on Instagram about successes he didn't put a shred of effort into. But Sophia loved him. And I, like a doting old father, decided to step aside. I moved to Spain to give them their space. It was the biggest mistake of my life. The plane touched down at George Bush Intercontinental at 9 a.m. The grueling South Texas heat slapped me in the face the moment I stepped through the terminal's glass doors. 104 degrees Fahrenheit. A dry, dusty heat that makes people lose their minds. Out of old habit, I rented a black armored SUV. I drove straight to River Oaks, ignoring the hotel and the fatigue. The anxiety in my stomach had turned into a heavy lead weight. If everything was fine, my arrival would be a pleasant surprise. If not, well, my hand instinctively brushed the 9mm Beretta tucked under the driver's seat. Someone was risking a very hard lesson on what it means to anger the Vega family. River Oaks is known as one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. Massive estates behind high walls, manicured lawns, 24/7 private security patrols. The place feels like a fortress. However, when I pulled up to the gates of the house I had bought for Sophia 3 years ago for $4 million, the heavy wrought iron gates were swung wide open. No security, no lock. In neighborhoods like this, no one leaves their gates open. It's an invitation for burglars or kidnappers to walk right in. I cut the engine and stepped out. The asphalt was practically smoking under the high noon sun. I walked into the yard. The grass, which Sophia always kept so meticulously, was ankle-high. Her favorite potted orchids were withered and black, their leaves hanging like lifeless arms. Sophia. I called out. My voice sounded dry. Robert. Silence. A tomb-like silence draped over the massive house. I pushed the front door, it was unlocked too. God, what is happening here? My hand reflexively moved to the grip of the pistol tucked behind my back under my blazer. A musty stench hit my nose. It wasn't the smell of death, but rather the spirit of an old bender. The fumes of cheap alcohol, stale tobacco smoke, and trash. The living room looked like a battlefield. Empty bottles of expensive cognac lay on the marble floor. Pizza boxes with mold on the glass table. On the wall, our family wedding photo hung crooked, the glass shattered to pieces. "Is anyone home?" I shouted louder. The echo from the empty staircase came back with a chilling dread. I checked the kitchen. Piles of dirty dishes in the sink, buzzing flies. A shiver ran down my spine. This couldn't be Sophia's house. My girl was a neat freak, she couldn't stand a speck of dust. I went up to the second floor. The master bedroom was empty. The walk-in closet was flung open, clothes tossed around. Designer dresses, expensive bags, gone. The safe in the corner of the room stood open and completely empty. Had they been robbed, or did they run? I went back downstairs, trying to force my old detective brain to assemble the puzzle. Open gates, filth, missing valuables, but no signs of a struggle or blood. And suddenly, I heard a sound. Very quiet, barely perceptible. If I hadn't frozen like a statue, I would have missed it. Clack. The sound of metal on metal. It was coming from behind the door leading to the garage. I held my breath and, creeping like an old cat, headed toward the door. I turned the knob, locked. "Sophia?" I called softly. In response, there was a moan. The moan of a wounded animal, so faint it sounded like the wind whistling through a crack. But I recognized it. It was my daughter's voice. My blood, that hot, southern blood, turned to ice for a second, then exploded into lava. I tried to shoulder the door open. It didn't budge, something heavy was blocking it from the other side. "Daddy's here. I'm here," I shouted, my voice breaking. I grabbed a heavy oak chair. There was no time for finesse. I slammed it against the door handle with all my might. Once, twice. The wood splintered. I stepped back and delivered a kick with all the strength of a man who, despite being 70, spends every morning in the gym. Bam! The door flew open, shoving aside an old refrigerator that someone had intentionally placed there. I burst into the darkness of the garage. The heat here was unbearable, 115 degrees at least. The AC wasn't running, only narrow slits near the ceiling let in dusty rays of light. The smell here was 10 times worse. Urine, stale sweat, and hopelessness. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the gloom, and when I saw her, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. In the far corner, near the main water pipe, a small figure lay on a filthy dog bed. Sophia. My daughter, my treasure, whom I had sworn to protect with my life, was in chains. A heavy iron chain was wrapped around her emaciated ankle. The other end was secured to the pipe with a massive industrial padlock. My God! I cried out, falling to my knees. Sophia lifted her head. Her hair was matted into clumps, her face sunken, her cheekbones jutting out, and her eyes had fallen into dark, lifeless sockets. She was so thin that her pajamas, several sizes too big, hung on her like she was a skeleton. "Dad!" she whispered in a hoarse, cracked voice. She squinted as if she didn't believe her eyes. "Dad, are you a hallucination?" "No, baby, it's me. I'm real." I rushed to her. Touching her shoulder made me shudder. Her skin was burning, but her body was racking with tremors. Severe dehydration, extreme malnutrition. She broke into sobs, not loud ones, but choking, agonizing whimpers. She clawed at my sleeve with her bony fingers. "Water, Dad. Water." I looked around frantically. I noticed a bottle of water by the door, there was still some left. I held it to her lips. She drank as if it were the purest spring in the world. "Slowly, honey, slowly. I stroked her hair, trying to hold back the tears. In my head, the image of the person who did this was already forming with absolute clarity. You don't need to be a detective to know who's guilty. I inspected the chain. The lock was too strong. Where is the key, Sophia? Where did they leave it? She shook her head weakly, pressing herself against my chest. Robert has it. He took it with him. I scanned the garage. There had to be tools. Even a worthless hack like Sullivan had to have tools. My eyes fell on the workbench. A pair of massive bolt cutters with red handles lay there, covered in dust. What a bitter irony. Using tools from her own home to turn her into a prisoner. I grabbed the bolt cutters. Cover your face, sweetie, I said in a lethal tone. I set the jaws of the tool against a link of the chain. The veins in my arms bulged. Rage poured strength into my old muscles. Crack. The sound of snapping metal rang out like a gunshot. The chain fell away. Sophia went limp in my arms. I picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. God, she used to be 130 pounds of life. Now, at a guess, she wasn't even 80. Like a dry leaf ready to crumble into dust. I carried her out of that hellish garage into the kitchen light. The light blinded her. She groaned and hit her face against my chest. I laid her down on the long sofa in the living room, the only clean spot left. Where are they? I asked with a calmness so absolute it scared me. It was the calm before a storm that levels cities. Where are Robert and that witch, Helen? Sophia looked at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving tracks through the dirt. Miami, Dad, she whispered. They flew to Boca Raton for vacation. Boca Raton. A paradise for those who live for show. Where the sea is blue and the sand is white, where cocktails cost as much as an average worker earns in a week. How long ago? I asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I lost track of the days. They chained me there. Said they needed a break from me. Left 6 bottles of water and a bag of stale bread. Said when they got back, they'd decide what to do. Or that if I died, it would be even better. I felt like I'd been kicked in the teeth. To starve her to death. This wasn't domestic abuse. This was a planned, cruel, slow-motion murder. They wanted her to die drop by drop so it would look like an accident or simple wasting. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Sullivan, Sophia continued, her voice trembling with terror. She said that after I died, Robert would inherit everything. The insurance, the trust fund, this house. She laughed when she closed the garage door. Said, tough out the heat, dear. Think of it as a free sauna to lose some weight, I roared, slamming my fist onto the coffee table. The glass finished shattering. Eve dealt with cartels, professional money launderers, and cold-blooded hitmen, but I'd never seen such low-life cruelty. A 60-year-old woman and her son, people who wear designer labels and go to church on Sundays, were capable of this. How long were you in the garage? 3 weeks, Sophia replied. But before that? For 5 months they kept me locked in the bedroom. Robert beat me every time I refused to sign checks. He forced me to authorize transfers. Said he owed people. Very dangerous people. Who did he owe? I don't know. He called them people from the shadows, said if he didn't pay up, they'd cut off his hands. So he chose to cut off my life instead. I looked at the bruises on my daughter's arms. Old yellow ones and fresh purple ones. And the marks from the chains on her ankles, which were bleeding. My naivety almost killed my child. I thought Robert was just a worthless loafer. I didn't know he was a demon in human skin. And his mother, Helen, was a venomous snake whispering in his ear. I got up and went to the kitchen for a clean cloth and warm water to wash Sophia. When I returned, she had already drifted into a heavy sleep from exhaustion. Looking at her, I realized. The part of me that was Roger Vega, the kind grandpa on retirement, died in that second. His place was taken by the special agent, the man who once made the most corrupt officials in Washington tremble. I took out my phone. I didn't call 911. Local police are fine, but the process would be too slow, and who knows if the Sullivans have connections in the city council or influential friends. I needed my own army. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years but knew by heart. The phone was picked up after the second ring. Roger? Is that you? A deep, commanding voice asked. Hello, General, I said in a voice of ice. I need a favor. Not as a friend, but as a debtor. On the other end was General Miller, commander of the State National Guard, a man whose career and life I had saved during a high-profile case 10 years ago. Talk to me, Roger. Where are you? Houston, my daughter's house. I need your best medical team. Maximum discretion. No sirens, no press. And I need this place cordoned off as a federal crime scene. Silence hung on the line. Miller understood. If I was using this tone, blood had been spilled. Understood. My people will be there in 10 minutes. What happened? My daughter was kidnapped and tortured by her own husband and mother-in-law. Details later. Send the men. Now. I hung up. At that moment, I heard footsteps on the walkway. I spun around, hand on my pistol. A middle-aged woman in a flamboyant dress, walking a tiny poodle, was peeking through the open door. A neighbor. Oh my God, the gates are wide open. She muttered, then she saw me. Who are you? What are you doing in the Sullivans' house? I stepped out to meet her, trying to keep my face as calm as possible, though inside I was burning with the urge to kill. I'm Sophia's father, Roger Vega. She gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. Oh, hello. I'm Clara, I live across the street. I was so worried, I saw the open door. Where's Sophia? I haven't seen her in ages. I looked her straight in the eye. Gossips in wealthy neighborhoods like this are the best surveillance cameras. Mrs. Clara, you say you haven't seen Sophia in a while. But have you seen Robert? Of course. She chirped. Last Tuesday I saw Robert and his mother, the elegant Mrs. Helen. They called a huge Uber XL. They were loading suitcases. A mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage. My heart hammered faster. How did they look? Were they worried about anything? Worried? Clara laughed shrilly. Not at all. They were laughing at the top of their lungs. Mrs. Helen even waved at me. And Robert shouted, "Goodbye, Houston Sweatbox, we're flying to paradise," said they were going to Boca Raton to relax. They looked so happy, like they'd hit the jackpot. Happy, I repeated to myself, clenching my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. But it's so strange, Clara lowered her voice to a whisper. I thought Sophia was already in the car. Because who goes on vacation with just their mother-in-law, leaving their young wife at home? Right, sir. I gave a grim nod. Very strange. In the distance, the roar of powerful engines grew louder. 2 black SUVs with no markings, accompanied by a military ambulance, pulled into the street. General Miller never fails. Thank you, Clara. Go home and, please, don't tell anyone about this. For your own safety. Seeing the armed men in uniform, Clara turned pale, gave a frantic nod, and almost ran back into her house. I went back to Sophia. The paramedics were already coming in with the gurney. They were laughing while they left my daughter to die. They called this place a sweatbox. They went to paradise. Fine, Robert. Fine, Helen. You like paradise? It'll show you what hell looks like. It'll make you curse the day you were born. I gently touched my daughter's forehead before they loaded her into the ambulance. Rest now, baby. When you wake up, the world will be different. I promise. I stepped out of the house and pulled out my phone to dial a second number, Manning, the most bloodthirsty shark in the Texas legal world. The hunt begins. Manning's office was located on the top floor of a glass skyscraper in downtown Houston, overlooking the urban jungle. When I walked in, still smelling of the dust and despair of that garage, the receptionist tried to stop me. I didn't say a word, I just looked at her. She must have seen the ghost of 1,000 crime scenes in my eyes, because she immediately stepped back and pointed toward the mahogany doors. Roger, you look like you've been through a meat grinder, Manning said, looking up from a pile of legal briefs. I need every asset of the Sullivan family frozen by sunset, I said, leaning over his desk. I need their credit cards blocked, their passports flagged, and a RICO-style investigation launched into Robert Sullivan's business associates. He's been laundering money, Manning. And he's been doing it through my daughter's accounts. Manning narrowed his eyes. That's a tall order, even for me. We need a judge who doesn't mind bending the rules for an old Fed. Find one. Because if the law doesn't stop them, I will. And my version of justice doesn't involve a courtroom. I left Manning to work his magic and headed to the hospital where General Miller's team had taken Sophia. It was a private facility, guarded by men in suits who didn't look like hospital security. They were Miller's specialized contractors. I sat by Sophia's bed for hours. She looked so fragile under the white hospital sheets, tubes snaking into her arms. The doctor told me she had severe kidney distress and stage 2 malnutrition. If I had arrived 48 hours later, I would have been planning a funeral instead of a rescue. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a private investigator I'd hired an hour ago. Location confirmed. The Waldorf Astoria, Boca Raton. Room 402. Checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan. They were there. Living it up on my daughter's blood money while she was fighting for her life in a Houston ICU. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. I called General Miller. I need a transport to Florida. Tonight. Roger, be careful, Miller's voice was heavy with concern. You're not on the job anymore. If you cross the line, I can't pull you back. The line was crossed when they chained my daughter to a pipe, General. Now, I'm just balancing the scales. 4 hours later, I was stepping onto the tarmac in West Palm Beach. The air was humid, smelling of salt and expensive perfume. I rented a nondescript Ford Fusion. I didn't want to be noticed this time. I arrived at the Waldorf Astoria just as the sun began to rise over the Atlantic. It was a beautiful, sickening sight. I sat in the lobby, hidden behind a copy of the Wall Street Journal, waiting. At 9:30 a.m., the elevator doors slid open. Out stepped Robert Sullivan. He was wearing a salmon-colored Ralph Lauren polo, white linen shorts, and loafers without socks. He looked like the poster boy for trust fund trash. Beside him was Helen, his mother. She wore an oversized sun hat and a silk scarf that probably cost more than a teacher's monthly salary. They were laughing. Robert was holding a mimosa in one hand and his phone in the other. "Oh, Robert, we really should stay another week," I heard Helen chirp. "The spa here is much better than the one in Houston. And it's so much quieter." "Well, see, Mother. Once the situation at home is resolved, we'll have all the time and money in the world." My grip on the newspaper tightened so hard the paper tore. The situation, my daughter's life was a situation to them. I waited until they headed toward the outdoor pool area, a secluded spot surrounded by lush hibiscus bushes. There were no other guests around yet. I stepped out from behind the greenery. Beautiful morning for a swim, isn't it, Robert? Robert froze. The glass in his hand shattered on the stone tiles. The color drained from his face, turning him a sickly shade of gray. Roger. What are you doing here? I came to see the paradise you mentioned, I said, walking toward them slowly. My footsteps felt like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Helen puffed out her chest, trying to maintain her grand dame persona. Roger. You startled us. We thought you were still in Madrid. Sophia is. Well, she's a bit under the weather, she couldn't join us. Shut up, Helen, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How dare you? I pulled the 9mm from my waistband and pointed it directly at Robert's kneecap. Helen screamed, a high-pitched, jagged sound that cut through the morning air. One more sound out of you, and they'll make sure he never walks again, I told her. She choked back her sob, her eyes wide with terror. Roger, listen, I can explain. Robert stammered, his hands shaking in the air. I had debts. Bad people, Roger. They were going to kill me. I just needed a little time to get the money from Sophia's trust. So you chained her in a garage? In 110-degree heat? Without food? Without water? I took a step closer. The barrel of the gun was now inches from his chest. You didn't just take her money, Robert. You tried to take her soul. It was his idea. Helen suddenly shrieked, pointing at her son. He said she was useless. He said we deserved the money more. Mother, shut up. Robert yelled. I looked at them, two parasites feeding on each other, ready to betray one another to save their own skin. They were pathetic. I'm not going to kill you, I said. Robert let out a breath of relief. Because death is too easy for people like you. I want you to feel exactly what Sophia felt. In that moment, 3 black SUVs roared onto the pool deck, tires screeching. Men in tactical gear with FBI and IRCI patches swarmed the area. Robert Sullivan, Helen Sullivan, you are under arrest for kidnapping, attempted murder, human trafficking, and federal money laundering, a lead agent shouted. Robert looked at me, confused. FBI? How? You forgot one thing, Robert, I said, putting my gun away as the agents tackled him to the ground. I didn't just spend 40 years in the field. I built the field. Every agent here was trained by someone I know. And Manning? He found your business associates, they've already turned on you to save themselves. You're going to a federal penitentiary where pretty boys like you don't last a week. As they were being dragged away in handcuffs, Helen began to wail about her rights and her reputation. Your reputation is gone, Helen, I called out. And your house? It's being seized by the government today. You'll be lucky if the state gives you a public defender who knows your name. I watched them being shoved into the back of the SUVs. The Florida sun was high now, burning bright. I pulled out my phone and called the hospital in Houston. How is she? She's awake, Mr. Vega, the nurse replied. She's asking for you. Tell her I'm coming home. And tell her. The trash has been taken out. 6 months later, the humid heat of Houston had given way to a mild, golden autumn. I was sitting on the terrace of a penthouse apartment I had helped Sophia lease in Austin. We needed a change of scenery, away from the ghosts of River Oaks and the prying eyes of the Houston socialites. Sophia was sitting across from me, sipping a kale smoothie. She had regained her weight, and the light had returned to her eyes, though a small, jagged scar remained on her ankle, a permanent reminder of the chain. She was currently finishing her certification to become a child advocate for the Texas court system. She wanted to protect those who had no voice, just as she once hadn't. "I got a letter from the district attorney today, Dad," Sophia said quietly, looking out over the Lady Bird Lake. I put down my glass of iced tea. And Robert's plea deal was rejected. The federal judge, Judge Miller's brother-in-law, I assume, sentenced him to 35 years without the possibility of parole. He's being sent to a high-security facility in Beaumont. He cried in the courtroom. He actually begged me to help him. I felt a cold satisfaction. Beaumont wasn't a country club. It was a place where names like Salavon meant nothing, and weakness meant everything. "And Helen?" I asked. "That's the part that feels like divine justice," Sophia replied. "She had a massive stroke in the detention center last week. She's paralyzed on her right side and can't speak. She's been moved to a state-run medical ward for prisoners. She's trapped in her own body now, Dad. Depending on strangers for every breath, every meal. Exactly what she tried to do to me." I leaned back, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange. "You reap what you sow, sweetheart," I said. My phone vibrated on the table. A text from General Miller. "Case closed. Files sealed. The trash is processed. Enjoy your retirement, Roger. You earned it." I turned off the phone. Throughout my career at the IRS and the FBI, I had chased monsters across borders and through bank accounts. I had seen the darkest corners of the human heart, but I never felt I had done anything more important than what I did 6 months ago in that garage. The world out there was still full of Roberts and Helens, parasites waiting for a chance to strike. But here, on this balcony, there was only peace. "Dad?" Sophia called out, smiling as she pulled up a travel website on her laptop. I was thinking. Maybe we should actually go to Spain together this time. No work, no hiding. Just a real vacation. I smiled, the tension finally leaving my shoulders. The old tiger could finally rest. "Pack your bags, kiddo. The first round of tapas is on me." Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel, there are plenty more stories to come.